Well, the FBI has reportedly received tips from over 40 confidential sources about Joe, Hunter, and James Biden's alleged criminal activity. That's according to Republican Senator Chuck Grassley. Now, in a letter to Merrick Garland and released to Fox News Digital exclusively, Grassley claims that an FBI task force within the Washington field office, quote, sought to, and in some cases successfully, shut down reporting and information from those sources by falsely discrediting the information as foreign disinformation.
Recently, this clip of newly minted Speaker Mike Johnson grilling Merrick Garland over the Hunter Biden investigation has gone viral. Let's watch.
Have you had personal contact with anyone at FBI headquarters about the Hunter Biden investigation?
I don't recollect the answer to that question, but the FBI works for the Justice Department. It's.
I'm sorry. You don't recollect. You don't recollect whether you've talked with anybody at FBI headquarters about an investigation of the president's son?
I don't believe that I did.
So, to recap, so these are confidential sources at the FBI, various FBI agencies. It was not centralized, as different field offices around the country accumulated this information from these confidential sources over the course of the previous investigations. And then, according to Grassley, so this isn't like new. It's new that it happened, but this has happened in the past. Grassley says that some of these the investigations into doing something with the information they received got shut down because that the evidence being offered by these confidential sources was discredited as so-called foreign misinformation, which raises red flags given that so many law enforcement, national security experts, former heads of the CIA, came together and signed that letter saying that the whole laptop story in the first place, the New York Post laptop story, had all the similarities and hallmarks of a Russian misinformation influence campaign. So, and we know, how that turned out. We know that that was a completely false evaluation of what was a legitimate news story and a real, tangible piece of information that Russia had not had anything to do with. So then the question becomes, was that same approach taken with information that might be relevant to any kind of criminal inquiry into what the Bidens are doing, and was it dismissed along those same totally incorrect lines?
Yeah, so first and foremost, it's so juvenile to assess the credibility of evidence purely because of its source. It's like a built-in logical fallacy. Whether or not you should be skeptical or scrutinize the source and consider whether or not there are motives involved that might taint the information, that's one thing. But if the conversation stops and started at this could be Russian misinformation, well, you have to first prove that it's misinformation. Information that happens to be from Russia doesn't mean it's wrong. If a Russian says the sky is blue, you'd think that half of D.C. would say, no, it's not, it's red. Although, ironically, that would make you more Russian in some ways. But, after we've gone through all of this, we've gone through the Steele dossier, the mainstream press had no problem running with, even though it was later discredited. And to see continually that potentially useful and necessary investigations might have been held up because of the specter of Russian misinformation is really frustrating. I will say, however, that at this stage, I still remain skeptical that anywhere buried in any of this is the smoking gun that I think some conservatives are hoping for, tying not just Hunter Biden's business dealings to Joe Biden, but really proving in a meaningful way that there was a pay-for-play scheme afoot here.
Right.
Outside of what I think is already the bad behavior that so many rich people and others nepotistically engage with all the time.
And maybe they'll never be able to muster enough evidence that that was the case. But man, does the process to get there seem pretty suspect to me. Given the misinformation framing is just so whenever I see that now I go, okay, wait, what are they actually alleging? Because how many times have law enforcement's contentions along these lines been just totally wrong? Whether it's the laptop story, whether it's the FBI agents communicating with Twitter and saying we would like this list of accounts destroyed because these are Russian-generated bots, and Twitter's the pre-Elon people, not crazy right-wingers, the Twitter, the normal, nice, liberal Twitter moderators looking and saying these are Americans, these are legitimate accounts. This is just wrong. They've been so wrong, the national law enforcement, in their messaging on these topics. So I don't trust it at all, and I would be greatly concerned that people with relevant evidence or testimony were not listened to because some so-called national security expert says, that sounds like something Russia would say. Which, as you point out, is not a legitimate, even if Russia would say it, is it right or is it wrong?
Yeah.
Is it not, it could be in Russia's interests. It could be something they want you to know, and it could still be like a piece of information that's relevant to an investigation or to what the American public would like to know about what went on. So I hope to hear more. We need more disclosure on what this process looked like, for sure.
Yeah, I'm curious what you make of the Mike Johnson connection. We're all just getting to know him now, but now that we are looking, now that we're looking more closely, it does seem that he has been part of the group of Republicans that have been very skeptical of the FBI and critical of it. Do you think that we might see more meaningful movement on these calls to defund the FBI that up until this moment have been largely rhetorical, now that you have someone like Mike Johnson in the speaker's chair?
I mean, I hope so. I hope he takes very seriously what is clearly one of the most important issues in the upcoming election for many Republican voters is the perceived weaponization of law enforcement against Donald Trump and against conservatives, the overreach that has occurred and the sense of unfairness they have about it. And that's a concern that conservatives and a lot of people on the left can link up and walk arm in arm down the street about how violating of people's civil liberties and due process and free speech, the G-men have been on so many fronts. So I think many conservatives, your Matt Gaetz types, your Jim Jordan types, were not confident that when McCarthy denounced the deep state, the overreach, that he actually means it. And maybe this guy has a little bit more cred. Now, having more cred and actually doing something about it, there's a vast gulf, obviously, and Republicans frequently continue to fund agencies and organizations that are aspects of the government that they say are malicious and working against them. And by the way, here's a check. Here, your budget just got boosted for next year. I don't understand it, and a lot of Republican voters don't understand it. There are, a couple, your Thomas Masseys, your Rand Pauls, who are pretty good on actually wanting to defund some of these things, but they end up being lone voices. So
yeah, I mean, I keep going back to the interview we did with Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I've taken a lot of heat for very vocally and loudly agreeing with wanting to defund the FBI, and I argue that progressives should be picking up the ball here and running with it and sponsoring legislation that would do so in a way that actually is geared toward preventing the kind of overreaches that the left and others have experienced in the past, as opposed to it just being a narrowly tailored ploy to try to keep one of the richest and most powerful men in America from having any culpability for the crimes that he has been accused of. And when I asked Marjorie Taylor Greene if there had been any legislation drafted, any efforts to reach out to progressives, the answer to that, this was months ago now, was no. So I got to say, I'm kind of skeptical. I do think that a lot of the rhetoric around defunding the FBI that's happening on the right is largely performative, but I would like to be proven wrong and to see if Mike Johnson actually brings some kind of legislation to the floor that would actually start to put some meat behind these arguments.
Well, we will have more Rising right after this.